The city never slept, and neither did I. At 78, my hands were calloused, my knees ached, and my heart carried the weight of decades. But I still rose before dawn. The skyscraper at 47th and Lexington, a gleaming monument of glass and steel, was my domain, though no one knew it. To the tenants, the executives, the young interns with their pressed suits and hurried steps, I was just Eleanor, the cleaning lady, a shadow in a faded blue uniform, pushing a cart of rags and bleach, unnoticed except when someone needed a spill mopped up. "Morning, Eleanor," grunted Mr. Hargrove, the building manager, as he breezed past me, his coffee cup sloshing. He never looked up from his phone. I nodded, my lips pressed into a thin smile, and kept polishing the brass elevator buttons. They shone like mirrors, reflecting my weathered fascia face no one bothered to study. I didn't mind. Invisibility had its advantages. It let me listen, observe, and remember. The building was alive with stories. The lawyer on the 12th floor who whispered about a merger that could ruin lives. The graphic designer on the 8th who cried in the stairwell over a lost contract. The CEO on the top floor who barked orders but trembled when he thought no one was watching. I saw it all, heard it all, and kept it locked in my chest like a vault. My days began at 4 a.m., when the city was still cloaked in quiet. I'd slip into the service entrance, the one nobody important used, and start my rounds. The lobby was my favorite, marble floors that echoed under my steps, chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars. I'd scrub and polish until the place gleamed, not because it was my job, but because it was mine. Every inch of this building belonged to me, though I'd spent decades ensuring no one suspected it. 40 years ago, I'd been a different woman. Eleanor Brooks, not yet gray, not yet stooped, had walked into this very building with a dream and a dollar figure scribbled on a napkin. Back then, it was a crumbling relic, a forgotten property in a city that didn't care. I was a widow with no children, no savings, and no one to believe in me but myself. My husband, James, had left me a small insurance payout when he passed barely enough to cover rent in our tiny apartment. But I saw something in this building, something others missed. With every cent I had, and loans I fought tooth and nail to secure, I bought it. The real estate agent laughed as he handed me the keys, calling it a money pit. I didn't care. I saw its bones, its potential, its future. I didn't just want to own it. I wanted to make it thrive. So, I worked. I cleaned it myself, learned its quirks, the creaky pipes, the drafty windows, and hired contractors to fix what I couldn't. I leased out floors to small businesses, then bigger ones, until the building became a hub of ambition and dreams. I built a management company to run it, kept my name off the paperwork, and let others take the credit. Why? Because power doesn't need a spotlight. It's enough to know it's yours. But the years wore on, and I never stopped cleaning. It wasn't about money anymore. I could have retired decades ago. It was about staying close to my creation, feeling its pulse under my hands. Besides, the uniform gave me freedom. People say things around a cleaning lady they'd never say around a landlord. They forget you have ears. That morning, as I polished the reception desk, a young woman in a sharp blazer stormed in, her heels clicking like gunfire. "Eleanor, the conference room on 15 is a mess. Coffee stains everywhere. Can you handle it before the 9 a.m. meeting?" She didn't wait for an answer, already scrolling her phone. Her name was Claire, an executive assistant who treated me like furniture. I nodded and pushed my cart toward the elevator. The conference room was indeed a disaster, paper cups strewn across the table, a whiteboard smeared with marker, and a faint smell of burnt coffee. As I cleaned, I overheard two men in suits outside the door, their voices low but sharp. "If we don't get that lease renewed, we're done," one said. "Hargrove says the owner's hiking the rent again. Some faceless corporation. Probably." I kept scrubbing, my face blank, but my heart quickened. They didn't know the owner was wiping their coffee rings off the mahogany. By noon, I'd finished the conference room and moved to the 20th floor, where a tech startup had set up shop. The employees were young, barely out of college, their desks cluttered with energy drinks and laptops. One of them, a kid named Ethan with a mop of curly hair, smiled at me. "You're a lifesaver, Eleanor. This place would fall apart without you." It was the closest thing to kindness I got most days. I smiled back, but didn't linger. Sentimentality wasn't my style. As the day wore on, I felt the building's rhythm shift. The lunch rush filled the lobby with chatter. The elevators hummed, and the air buzzed with the urgency of deals being made. I worked through it all, unnoticed, my hands steady despite the ache in my joints. But something was brewing, a tension I could feel in the clipped voices, the hurried footsteps. The building was a living thing, and it was restless. That evening, as I emptied trash cans on the 30th floor, I found a crumpled memo in a bin. It was from Hargrove, addressed to all tenants. "Due to rising operational costs, lease rates will increase by 15% effective next quarter." My lips tightened. I hadn't authorized that. Hargrove was getting bold, making decisions without consulting me. I tucked the memo into my pocket and kept working, my mind turning over what to do next. The truth was, I'd been content to stay in the shadows, to let the building speak for me. But shadows only hide you for so long. I could feel the weight of eyes on the tenants. Not yet, but the building itself, urging me to step forward. I wasn't just a cleaning lady, and soon, they'd all know it. The next morning, the air in the building felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. I arrived at my usual hour, the sky still bruised with night, and began my rounds. The memo I'd found gnawed at me. Hargrove's unauthorized rent hike wasn't just a mistake. It was a challenge to my authority, however hidden it was. I'd built this empire from nothing, and I wasn't about to let a middleman undermine it. As I swept the lobby, the first tenants trickled in. A woman in a pencil skirt muttered about the rent increase to her colleague, her voice sharp with worry. 15%. We'll have to cut staff. Her words landed like stones in my chest. I kept my head down, my broom moving in steady arcs. But I was listening. Always listening. By mid-morning, I was on the 10th floor, cleaning the offices of a small accounting firm. The employees were huddled in a break room, their voices low but frantic. I heard the owner's some big-shot investor who doesn't even live in the city. One said, "Probably doesn't care if we go under." I paused, pretending to adjust my cleaning supplies, my pulse quickening. They were wrong, but I couldn't correct them. Not yet. The building was more than a business to me. It was a legacy, a testament to what a woman with nothing but grit could achieve. Every lease I'd signed, every repair I'd overseen, had been a step toward proving I was more than what the world saw: a widow, a nobody, a cleaning lady. But keeping my ownership a secret had been deliberate. It let me move freely, watch closely, and protect what was mine without the burden of scrutiny. Now, though, that secrecy was starting to crack. At noon, I took my lunch break in the basement storage room, a dim space cluttered with old files and spare janitorial supplies. It was my sanctuary, the one place no one bothered me. I sat on a crate, eating a sandwich, and pulled out the crumpled memo. Hargrove's signature was scrawled at the bottom, bold and careless. He'd been managing the building for a decade, and I'd let him believe he was in charge. It was easier that way until now. I remembered the day I hired him. He was younger then, eager, with a salesman's smile and a knack for numbers. I'd stayed in the background, letting my management company handle the interviews. But I'd watched him closely. He was competent, but ambition had a way of curdling into arrogance. This memo was proof of that. As I finished my lunch, the door creaked open, and Ethan, the curly-haired kid from the tech startup, poked his head in. "Eleanor, you down here?" His voice was tentative, like he wasn't sure he should be there. "What's up, kid?" I asked, brushing crumbs off my uniform. He hesitated, then stepped inside, clutching a laptop. I wanted to ask you something. You've been here forever, right? You must know this building better than anyone." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my expression neutral. "I get around." He laughed nervously. "Yeah. Well, we're freaking out upstairs. That rent hike. It's gonna kill us. I was wondering if you'd heard anything like. Who's behind it? The owner. I mean." My heart thudded, but I kept my face blank. "I'm just the cleaning lady, Ethan. Nobody tells me anything." He sighed, running a hand through his curls. "I know. You see everything, don't you? People talk around you. I thought maybe you'd heard a name. Or something." I studied him. His eyes were earnest, worried, not the usual cocky spark of youth. He reminded me of myself at that age, scrambling, hoping, afraid of losing everything. "I'll keep my ears open," I said finally. "But don't hold your breath." He nodded, thanked me, and left. I leaned back against the wall, the memo burning a hole in my pocket. Ethan's question wasn't just curiosity. It was a warning. The tenants were restless, and they were looking for someone to blame. If I didn't act soon, Hargrove's stunt could unravel everything I'd built. That afternoon, I cleaned the executive suites on the 35th floor, where the air smelled of leather and expensive cologne. The CEO of a marketing firm, Mr. Donovan, was pacing his office, yelling into his phone. 15%. Are you kidding me? I'll take my business elsewhere." I moved quietly, emptying his trash, but his words echoed in my mind. The building was my life's work, but to them, it was just a line item on a budget. As I worked, I overheard more snippets: tenants planning to leave, others talking about lawsuits. The unrest was spreading, and Hargrove was at the center of it. I needed to confront him, but not as Eleanor, the cleaning lady. I needed to step out of the shadows, just enough to remind him who was really in charge. That evening, I lingered in the lobby after my shift, watching Hargrove lock up his office. He was whistling, oblivious to the storm he'd stirred. I approached him, my cart rattling behind me. "Mr. Hargrove," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Got a minute?" He blinked, surprised, then waved a hand dismissively. "Eleanor, I'm swamped. Can it wait?" "No," I said, sharper than I meant to. "It's about the rent hike." His eyes narrowed, but he forced a smile. "That's above your pay grade. Eleanor, don't worry about it. I held his gaze, letting the weight of my years settle between us. You'd be surprised what I worry about, I said. He laughed, thinking it was a joke, and walked away. I stood there, the lobby silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Hargrove thought he was untouchable, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. Not yet. I turned back to my cart, my hands steady, my mind racing. The building was mine, and I'd fought too hard to let it slip through my fingers. Tomorrow, I'd start planning. Tomorrow, I'd remind them all who Eleanor Brooks really was. The next day, the building buzzed with a restless energy. Word of the rent hike had spread like wildfire, and every conversation I overheard carried a note of panic or defiance. I moved through my rounds with my usual quiet efficiency, but inside, I was a coiled spring. Hargrove's memo wasn't just a misstep. It was a betrayal of the trust I'd placed in him to manage my building fairly. I'd stayed invisible for too long, and now the tenants were suffering for it. As I polished the glass doors on the 5th floor, I caught snippets of a heated discussion in a law office. "We can't afford this," a woman said, her voice trembling. "I'm drafting a letter to the owner, whoever they are." Her colleague scoffed. "Good luck. They're probably some corporate suit who doesn't care." I kept my head down, but their words stung. They weren't wrong to be angry, but they were wrong about me. By lunchtime, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't confront Hargrove directly, not as the cleaning lady. Anyway, I needed to act through the management company, but subtly, so no one would trace it back to me. I slipped into the basement storage room and pulled out my old burner phone, one I kept for moments like this. I sent a brief email to the management company's board, signing it as E. Brooks, majority shareholder. The message was simple: investigate the recent lease adjustment. No changes are to be implemented without my approval. I hit send, my heart pounding. It was the first time in years I'd flexed my authority, even from behind the curtain. That afternoon, I cleaned the 25th floor, where a nonprofit had their offices. The employees were quieter than usual, their faces drawn. One of them, a woman named Maria, approached me as I emptied a recycling bin. "Eleanor, you've been here forever," she said, her voice soft. "Do you think the owner knows how hard this rent hike will hit us?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I think the owner knows more than people realize," I said. "Give it time." Maria sighed, unconvinced. "Time's the one thing we don't have." She walked away, and I felt a pang of guilt. I'd built this building to be a place of opportunity, not a burden. I needed to fix this, and fast. As the day wore on, I noticed Hargrove acting differently. He was jumpy, checking his phone constantly, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous edge. My email must have reached him. Good. Let him sweat. I kept cleaning, my hands steady, but my mind was racing. I'd given him a chance to correct his mistake, but if he didn't, I'd have to take more drastic measures. That evening, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. I was mopping the hallway on the 15th floor when Claire, the executive assistant, was talking to a colleague outside the conference room. Hargrove saying the owner's a recluse, some old woman who inherited the building and doesn't care about us. She said, "He's trying to push the rent hike through before she notices." My grip tightened on the mop handle. An old woman, a recluse. Hargrove was closer to the truth than he realized, but his arrogance blinded him. He thought he could manipulate me, manipulate my building. He was wrong. I finished my shift and headed to the basement, where I kept a small locked box hidden behind a stack of cleaning supplies. Inside was a folder of documents, deeds, contracts, proof of my ownership. I hadn't looked at them in years, but they were a reminder of what I'd fought for. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, my resolve hardening. Hargrove's time was running out. The next morning, I arrived early. As always, the lobby was quiet, the chandeliers casting soft light across the marble. I started my rounds, but my thoughts were on the bigger picture. I'd spent decades building this place, pouring my heart into every detail. I'd let others take the credit, let them think they ran the show, because it kept me free. But freedom came at a cost, and I was starting to see it in the worried faces of the tenants, in the whispers of rebellion. Around noon, Ethan found me again, this time in the elevator. "Eleanor, you won't believe it," he said, his eyes wide. "Hargrove's holding a tenant meeting tomorrow to discuss the rent hike. He's acting like it's a done deal." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Thanks for the heads up, kid." He hesitated, then added, "You should come. I mean, you work here too. You deserve a say." I almost laughed. A say? I had more than that. But I just smiled and said, "Maybe I will." As Ethan walked away, I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. The meeting could be my chance not to reveal everything. Not yet, but to start shifting the narrative. I'd let Hargrove think he was in control for too long. It was time to remind him, and everyone else, that this building had a heart and it was mine. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, listening, planning. The tenants were organizing, talking about petitions and walkouts. They were fighting for their place here, just as I had all those years ago. I admired their spirit, but I couldn't let it spiral into chaos. I needed to act, not as Eleanor the cleaning lady, but as Eleanor Brooks, the woman who'd built an empire from a dream and a dollar. The tenant meeting was set for 6 p.m. in the conference room on the 15th floor. All day, the building hummed with anticipation, the air thick with whispered plans and nervous energy. I went about my rounds as usual, my blue uniform blending into the background. But my mind was sharp, calculating. Hargrove thought he could steamroll the tenants and with his rent hike. He was about to learn how wrong he was. By late afternoon, I'd finished cleaning the lower floors and made my way to the 15th. The conference room was already filling up, tenants trickling in with coffee cups and notepads, their faces a mix of anger and resolve. I lingered outside, wiping down a water fountain, listening as they greeted each other. "We can't let this happen," one said. "We need to know who's pulling the strings," said another. I kept my head down, but my heart was racing. They were closer to the truth than they knew. At 5:55, I slipped into the back of the room, pushing my cleaning cart to a corner where I wouldn't be noticed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the crowd. Hargrove stood at the front, his tie loosened, his smile practiced. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice smooth but strained. "I know the rent adjustment has raised concerns, but it's necessary to keep this building competitive." The room erupted in protests. Claire, the executive assistant, stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. "Competitive? This is our livelihood. Who authorized this?" "The owner." Hargrove raised his hands, trying to calm the crowd. "The owner is aware and supports the decision. They trust me to manage the building's finances." I clenched my jaw. my hands tightening on my cart. Trust. He had no idea what trust meant. I wanted to stand up, to tell them the truth right then. But I held back. Timing was everything. And this wasn't the moment. Ethan, sitting near the front, raised his hand. Who is the owner? Mr. Hargrove. Why won't they meet with us? The room went quiet. All eyes on Hargrove. He shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering. The owner prefers to remain private. A corporation. Really? They're not involved in day-to-day operations. Liar. I muttered under my breath. Too low for anyone to hear. But Maria, the nonprofit worker, caught my eye from across the room. She gave me a curious look, like she'd sensed something in my posture. I turned away, focusing on a non-existent spot on the floor. The meeting dragged on, with tenants airing their grievances and Hargrove dodging questions. He promised to review the rent hike, but his tone was dismissive, like he was humoring them. I could see the frustration building, the tenants' voices growing louder, more desperate. They weren't just fighting for lower rent. They were fighting for their dreams, their businesses, their futures. I knew that fight. I'd lived it. As the meeting ended, people filed out, muttering about next steps petitions, legal action, even moving out. I stayed behind, pretending to clean the table, but really watching Hargrove. He was on his phone, his voice low. Yeah, it's under control, he said. They'll grumble, but they'll pay. The owner won't care. My blood boiled. I wanted to storm over, rip the phone from his hand, and tell him exactly who the owner was. But I didn't. Instead, I pushed my cart out of the room, my mind racing. Hargrove was gambling with my building, my legacy. I couldn't let him win. That night, I stayed late, long after the tenants had gone home. The building was quiet. The only sound the hum of the air vents and the faint creak of my cart. I went to the top floor, to the empty office I'd kept as my own, a small, unlisted space no one knew about. It wasn't much, a desk, a chair, a window overlooking the city. But it was where I came to think, to plan, to remember who I was. I sat at the desk and pulled out my burner phone. The management company had responded to my email, confirming they'd halted the rent hike pending review. Hargrove would get the news tomorrow, and he wouldn't be happy. Good. Let him feel the walls closing in. I leaned back, staring out at the city lights. I'd spent 40 years building this place, pouring my soul into it. I'd stayed in the shadows because it was easier, safer. But the shadows weren't protecting me anymore. They were hiding me from the people who needed to know the truth. The tenants deserved better. They deserved to know who was fighting for them. The next morning, I arrived at dawn. As always, the lobby was pristine, my handiwork from the night before. As I started my rounds, I noticed a new energy in the building. The tenants were still upset, but there was a spark of hope, rumors that the rent hike might be reconsidered. I overheard Ethan talking to a colleague in the elevator. Someone's got to be pulling strings behind the scenes, he said. Maybe the owner's not as heartless as we thought. I smiled to myself, pushing my cart down the hall. They didn't know it yet, but they were right. I wasn't heartless. I was just waiting for the right moment to step into the light. By midday, Hargrove was in a panic. I saw him in his office, pacing, barking into his phone. What do you mean? It's on hold. Who authorized that? I kept cleaning, my face blank. But inside, I was savoring the moment. He was starting to feel the weight of my shadow. As I worked, I began to plan my next move. The tenants needed a voice, someone to rally them, to show them the building wasn't just a machine for profit. I couldn't stay silent much longer. But revealing myself would mean tearing down the walls I'd built, exposing the truth I'd guarded for decades. Was I ready for that? Was the building ready? I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew one thing. Hargrove's days of running my building were numbered. And when the time came, I'd be ready to show them all who Eleanor Brooks really was. The building was a pressure cooker now, every floor simmering with tension. By the next morning, word had spread that the rent hike was on hold, and the tenants were buzzing with cautious hope. I moved through my rounds, my hands steady but my heart pounding. I'd pulled the first lever, but Hargrove wasn't the type to back down easily. He'd fight to keep his grip on the building, and I needed to be ready. As I cleaned the 12th floor, I overheard Claire talking to a group of tenants in a break room. Hargrove saying it's just a delay, not a cancellation, she said, her voice sharp. He's acting like he's still in charge. I paused, pretending to scrub a stubborn spot on a window, my ears straining. Hargrove was doubling down, trying to save face. I'd expected that, but it still stung. This was my building, and he was treating it like his personal kingdom. Around noon, I got a call on my burner phone, a rare occurrence. It was the management company's director, a man I'd dealt with only a handful of times. Ms. Brooks, he said, his voice tense. Hargrove's pushing back hard. He's claiming the rent hike was approved by the board. We need your direct input. I gripped the phone, my voice low. He has no approval. Dig into his records. I want a full audit of his decisions over the past year. And keep my name out of it. Understood, he said, and hung up. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my pulse racing. An audit would expose Hargrove's oversteps, but it would also bring me closer to the spotlight. I wasn't ready to reveal myself fully, but I was running out of time to stay hidden. That afternoon, Ethan found me again, this time in the lobby. He was carrying a stack of flyers, his face lit with determination. Eleanor, we're organizing a tenant coalition, he said. We're going to demand a meeting with the owner. You should join us. You know this place better than anyone. I looked at the flyer, a bold headline calling for transparency and fairness. It was a risk, but it was also an opportunity. I'll think about it, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Ethan grinned, like he thought he'd won me over, and hurried off. As the day wore on, I felt the building's pulse quicken. The tenants were uniting, their voices growing louder. I admired their fire, but I also knew it could burn out of control. If they pushed too hard, Hargrove might dig in deeper. Or worse, start digging into who the owner really was. I needed to act before that happened. That evening, I went to my secret office on the top floor. The city sparkled below, a reminder of how far I'd come. I opened my locked box and pulled out the documents, proof of my ownership, my contracts, my life's work. I spread them across the desk, my hands trembling slightly. For 40 years, I'd kept these papers hidden, just like I'd kept myself hidden. But the time for hiding was over. I drafted a letter to the tenants, signing it as E. Brooks, owner. It was simple but firm. The rent hike is canceled. I am reviewing the management's decisions and will ensure this building remains a place for growth and opportunity. Thank you for your patience. I didn't send it yet. He wanted to see how Hargrove would react to the audit first, but it felt good to write it, to put my name on the truth. The next morning, The building was electric with rumors. Hargrove had been called to a meeting with the management company, and he wasn't happy. I saw him in the lobby, his face red, snapping at an assistant. "This is ridiculous," he hissed. "They can't just override me." I kept my head down, polishing the brass railings. But inside, I was smiling. He was unraveling, and I was pulling the strings. By midday, the tenants were passing around Ethan's flyers, their excitement palpable. Maria stopped me in the hallway, her eyes bright. "Eleanor, have you heard? The rent hike's off. Someone's listening to us." I nodded, my face calm, but my heart soaring. "Sounds like good news," I said. She smiled and hurried off, leaving me alone with my thoughts. They were listening because I was listening, because I'd always been listening. That afternoon, I got another call from the management company. The audit had uncovered more than I'd expected. Hargrove had been skimming maintenance funds, redirecting them to his own accounts. It wasn't just arrogance. It was theft. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a rent hike anymore. He'd betrayed me, the tenants, and everything I'd built. I told the director to prepare a termination notice, but hold off on delivering it. I needed one more piece in Placio way to show the tenants that the owner wasn't a faceless corporation, but someone who cared. Someone who'd fought for this building just as they were fighting now. As I cleaned the 20th floor that evening, I overheard Ethan and his co-workers planning their next move. "If we can get the owner to meet us, we can make this place better," he said. "Not just for us, but for everyone." His words hit me hard. He was right. This building wasn't just mine, it belonged to everyone who worked here, dreamed here, fought here. I went back to my office that night, the letter to the tenants still on my desk. I read it over, my hand steady now. It was time, not just to stop Hargrove, but to step forward, to show them who I was. I added a line to the letter. "I will meet with you soon to discuss the future of this building. Together, we can make it stronger." I sealed the letter and sent it to the management company with instructions to distribute it the next day. As I locked up my office and headed home, the city lights seemed brighter, the air lighter. For the first time in years, I felt free not just to own, but to lead. The morning after I sent the letter, the building felt different. The air was charged, not with tension, but with possibility. I arrived at dawn, my blue uniform pressed, my hand steady. The tenants hadn't seen the letter yet. It would be emailed and posted in the lobby by noon, but I could feel the shift coming. Today was the day I'd step out of the shadows. As I polished the lobby chandelier, Ethan rushed in, his eyes wide. "Eleanor, you've got to see this." He thrust a flyer into my hands. A new one, announcing a tenant meeting to meet the owner. My letter had worked faster than I'd expected. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Sounds important," I said. "It is," he said, practically bouncing. "Whoever this Brooks is, they're finally listening. We might actually get somewhere." I smiled, my heart pounding. "I'll be there," I said, and he grinned before hurrying off. I turned back to the chandelier, its crystals catching the light like 1,000 tiny promises. I'd built this place, and now it was time to claim it. By midday, the letter was everywhere, pinned to bulletin boards, forwarded in emails, whispered about in every hallway. I overheard Claire in the elevator, her voice awed. Brooks. Who even is that?" "They sound human." I kept my eyes on the floor, but inside, I was soaring. Human. That's exactly what I was. Hargrove, meanwhile, was a wreck. I saw him in his office, packing files into a box, his face pale. The audit had hit him hard, and the termination notice was coming. He caught my eye through the glass and glared, like he sensed I was more than I seemed. I met his gaze, unflinching, then pushed my card away. He didn't know it yet, but his time was up. The meeting was set for 6 p.m. Same as before, in the 15th floor conference room. I spent the afternoon cleaning, my hands moving automatically while my mind rehearsed what I'd say. I wasn't nervous. Not exactly. I'd faced harder things than a room full of tenants. But this was different. This was me, laying my truth bare. At 5:30, I went to my office and changed out of my uniform. I put on a simple black dress, one I hadn't worn in years, and let my silver hair down from its bun. I looked in the small mirror on the wall, seeing not just the cleaning lady, but Eleanor Brooks' widow, dreamer, owner. My hands were still calloused, my face still lined, but my eyes burned with purpose. At 6, I walked into the conference room. The tenants were already there, their voices a low hum of anticipation. Ethan was at the front, passing out agendas. Claire was checking her phone. Maria was whispering to a colleague. They didn't notice me at first. Just another old woman in a room full of noise. Then I stepped to the front and cleared my throat. The room went silent. All eyes on me. I could feel their confusion, their curiosity. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Eleanor Brooks. I'm the owner of this building." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Ethan's jaw dropped. Claire's phone slipped from her hand. Maria's eyes widened, then softened, like she'd known all along. I stood tall, letting the weight of their stares settle over me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't invisible. "I've been here every day," I continued, cleaning, listening, watching. I built this place from nothing, and I've stayed in the shadows to keep it safe. But I'm done hiding. This building is yours as much as it is mine, and I'm here to make things right. The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in questions. "You're the owner. Why didn't you tell us? What about Hargrove?" I raised my hands, and they quieted. I stayed quiet because it let me see the truth. I said, "I know your struggles, your dreams. I know about the rent hike, and I've canceled it. Hargrove's been removed, effective immediately. From now on, I'll work with you directly. We'll make this building a place where everyone can thrive." The room exploded in applause. Ethan was grinning, tears in his eyes. Maria rushed forward and hugged me, whispering, "I knew there was something about you." Even Claire, usually so sharp, was smiling, her eyes soft. I spent the next hour answering questions, listening to their ideas, their hopes. They wanted transparency, fairness, a stake in the building's future. I promised them all of that and more. As the meeting ended, people came up to shake my hand, to thank me, to tell me their stories. I listened, just as I always had. But now they saw me, really saw me. That night, I walked through the lobby one last time, the chandeliers glowing above me. The building felt alive, not with tension, but with possibility. I'd spent 40 years building it, and now I was building something Newa community. A legacy, a truth. I wasn't just a cleaning lady anymore. I was Eleanor Brooks, and this was my building. But more than that, it was ours.